by Dr. Matt Firla-Cuchra, and would also like to invite to the stage another speaker, Mr. David Syed, the partner of DENTONS of the United Kingdom, and also board member of Indego Africa and Positive Planets of the United Kingdom. Please give him a big hand too. And to our moderator, we'd like to invite Mr. Adnan Rizvi, the partner of KPMG Pakistan. Please give him a big round of applause. Yes, Mr. Adnan Rizvi, unfortunately for this session, as we have a limited amount of timing because we have other sessions later as well, so for that we're going to have to cut shorter a little bit of our discussion time. So the floor is yours.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon to all of you. We have the topic today is the infrastructure development in Pakistan through the public-private partnership mode. We have two eminent panelists who are experts in their respective fields, so I'll just start with asking them questions and for the benefit of the audience, and we'll see if there's enough time to have a few questions from the audience. So Matt, I'll start from you. I understand that you have been recently involved in one of the infrastructure project taking place in Punjab. So what's your experience generally, keeping in view your international exposure and all, as to what's happening in Pakistan? How do you see it, the direction, and what can be done to further improve that?
Thank you very much. And I just want to say, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. It's an incredibly impressive event. So very pleased to be in Pakistan again and talking about infrastructure. Well, I think your question is a very good one. And I just want to start maybe with a couple of general observations. I think it is really hard to emphasize the importance of infrastructure. And infrastructure should be thought of as a very important stimulant of growth. Right? It's an enabler of economic growth. So it's not just an objective in itself, but should be planned ahead as a driver of economic growth. And in that way, it can be self-sustainable in a sense, because it supports economic growth, which then supports maintenance and development of infrastructure. I think there is a real risk when talking about infrastructure in thinking about individual projects. And that is really a global trend, that people start with thinking, how do we build the next power station? How do we build the next bridge? And my kind of overarching lesson is start by thinking about infrastructure strategy, about thinking holistically across different sectors, and in each sector in particular, and in each province, what it is that you want to achieve in infrastructure. And it's not just a matter of developing one single strategy. It cannot be just a document. It's a matter of dynamically thinking about strategy for development of infrastructure over time. And then going beyond the strategy, you need to create frameworks, processes, but most importantly, organizations that manage proactively that infrastructure strategy as you go along. And when we come to topics such as development of particular projects or PPPs or PFIs, I think those really need to be thought of as tools for the delivery of infrastructure. But they cannot be a substitute for a strategy and policy. And then when you go down from the strategy and policy level and the organizations that need to take responsibility for proactive, dynamic, overtime management of it, then you go to the level of regulation, system operation, and processes for delivery. You know, it is a little bit like building a house. When you start thinking about building a house, you don't start with a question, what should be the way of financing your kitchen, right? Or how you're gonna, whether you're gonna buy your fridge on credit, right? First of all, you need to think about what kind of kitchen you want, right? How does that fit into the overall design of the house? And we see this globally, both in developing countries and in developed countries, that people focus on what they perceive as tangible effects of developing a particular piece of infrastructure and jumping from one project to the next and focusing on perfecting a tool like a PPP or another model of delivery of infrastructure. But what they are missing is this first step of designing the policy and the long-term vision. And that, I think, is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Thank you. David, talking about project finance, as we were discussing that with these large infrastructure projects, you require a very long-term funding, which is in the absence of a proper bond market in Pakistan, that's not the case. So with your experience of developing countries, particularly some of the African countries, what sort of suggestions do you have in terms of developing a proper mechanism for long-term financing of these infrastructure projects?
Thank you. It's working? It's working, yeah. So yeah, I also want to say I'm very, very pleased to be here. Very happy to be in Islamabad today, and great conference. I think your question is really good. But I think what we just said about the holistic approach is really the key, which is you start with a plan, a strategy. Then you have tools to implement the strategy. Public-private partnership is a tool at the end of the day. It brings government at a regional level, at a national level, even at a local level, together with sponsors from the private sector. And it forces cooperation. I mean, all the themes of this morning were about cooperation. The quality of the strategy, the quality of the toolbox, the quality of the regulation, the quality of the sponsors, and the business plan. Now, I insist on the business plan because one of the things I've seen just everywhere is the lack. There's lots of projects to be financed. There's tons of projects. The infrastructure needs of Central Asia, Africa, South America, Indian subcontinent, etc., are legion. We're talking, trillions of dollars at probably over, 30 or 40 years. So how to finance it, to get to your point? Well, to do all of the above properly, to do it well, to have a well-structured business plan, and with project cash flows, with contingency planning. That is probably the weakest link at the moment. Certainly in Africa, one of the things we've been recommending to many governments, and not just in Africa, worldwide, and actually China has set up a special purpose subsidiary of CAD Fund to really address this issue. And I think the African Development Bank, in fact, I know, has set up also Africa 50. It's to finance the feasibility studies and the business plans, so that when you actually go to finance a project, you can actually talk the same language and it makes sense. So I think that's number one. And then the second thing is actually having access to the capital markets, having access to project financing from the banking sector is one thing. I think at the end of the day, you really need to be able to access the refinancing or straight to the capital markets. And from that standpoint, I think Pakistan, as a frontier market, currently I think is the proper name, has all of the requisite, it has the skill sets, it has the people, it has accountants, it has financiers, it has lawyers. What it needs is the regulation and the access. It doesn't have to be Pakistani capital markets. It can be global capital markets for Pakistani projects, but that needs to be fluid. So exchange controls have to be modified so that everything can happen in a completely seamless manner. Many countries have done it, so it's not like it's impossible.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Matt, you'd like to add something?
I was going to add very briefly. I agree with what David said, but I think it's useful to think about financing as almost like holding a mirror to yourself, right? If all the elements of what you've designed have been well designed, financing will come along. Financing is not a barrier today. The capital is very cheap in general in the world, is available, and can move very rapidly. The challenge is structuring of projects. And if that structuring is done right, the financing is forthcoming.
So that leads on to the next question, which you slightly mentioned about it, that in addition to the PPP mode, there are other modes of financing or the other modes of doing this infrastructure projects. So basically, what are the determinants that why would one select the PPP mode and what are the sort of selection criteria for these projects which you feel should be in place?
I mean, as I mentioned already, I think the selection of projects in infrastructure and the selection of your strategy has to start with the question of the need from a customer perspective and the impact on the economy. Because only if you start from the question, what is going to be the contribution to growth and on the economy, you can create something that is sustainable. Right? Second, I think we need to be very conscious of the fact that structures like PPP and PFIs are relatively rigid over time. And in industries which are very dynamic, only some of the projects will be efficiently financed and delivered, but by structures that are effectively fixed over concession periods. Right? So I think we need a mix. And that mix has to start, that question has to start with who is taking responsibility for the delivery of infrastructure and for the plan for the infrastructure in a given sector, in a given province. Right? And that could be a mix of public delivery, it could be a mix of project-specific delivery and financing, project finance, and it could be there could be an element of privatization and a model where corporate financing helps, where at the corporate level you have many different projects managed together. Right? And I think the last one is particularly important because in general, in infrastructure, we are observing a trend of moving away from singular projects into networks and systems of infrastructure. We have to think about infrastructure as systems, right, of different parts of infrastructure interacting together. Right? That is really what creates value in infrastructure. And if you divide everything into singular projects, you're going to lose that. So either you have to have organizational structures that coordinate across different projects, right? Or you have to have structures like corporate structures, part private, part public, that think holistically about infrastructure at the sector or province level.
Thank you. David, you were mentioning the policy sort of development at the state level for Madagascar. So can you shed some light for our audience? Yeah.
Sure. We were talking earlier, and it really goes to your point, Matt. But basically it's about coordination and prioritization, making sure that efficient resources are brought to bear at the right time and that priorities are established. So how to do that? Obviously, if everything is done on a local, regional basis, there's going to be duplication, triplication. I have a little problem with this, I think. No, it's fine, as long as I keep it steady. So what we did in Madagascar is we designed a PPP law, a PPP. It's a French-speaking country, so it's partenariat public-privé, same as in English. But they found great difficulties because each ministry was kind of fighting, or a ministry would want resources allocated to it. Oh, thank you very much. That's great. Hello? Hello? I think maybe the other one's better, actually. The other one works. It's better than that sense. Exactly. It's infrastructure. So what we recommended at the end of the day was a task force. And I think Sind has a task force for different ministries where you have unified financial, legal, technical analysis, but we recommended that at a state level. And also that all ministries had to basically, before starting a project, before doing the feasibility, actually go and do a pre-feasibility with the task force. And the task force was staffed on a multi-disciplinary, but also with people from the different ministries so that they were involved. And that has worked quite well. And so it's something I would recommend. It really streamlines the whole process. By the way, when we talk about infrastructure, just to be clear, we're talking about all types of infrastructure. This can be digital infrastructure, this can be roads, bridges. So it's really it's the implementation of a national development plan, right? Which can be a 225 plan, it could be a 230 plan, it could be whatever, the timeline, but it has to be relatively long. So it really is a global plan that's being implemented through this mechanism.
Okay, thank you. Matt, in relation to infrastructure, is particularly the favorite sort of acronym which is being used in Pakistan these days is CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So as a UK sort of based person and dealing with infrastructure and some flavor of Pakistan, what is your perception of
China with Europe and the Middle East? But also this era of very low cost of capital, right? And real interest and focus in new infrastructure assets. Remember the tremendous problem we have in the developed world in infrastructure is the shortage of investments, shortage of things to invest in, right? I meet with infrastructure funds all the time who are telling me, tell us what else we can invest in. And I think if you can leverage the Belt and Road program and the China-Pakistani corridor into creating new structures and opportunities, the kind of the world is waiting.
All right, good, thanks. David, on the same topic of CPEC, there is a concern in some of the business circles that at the end of the day, Pakistan will be under a huge debt burden and which will have a negative impact on our balance of payments, and we'll end up selling our sovereignty and those kind of things. So you've seen these kind of Chinese investments in the African countries and others. So what's your experience there?
Well, I think it's about choice. Number one, what do you believe in? I believe in sovereignty for countries. I don't believe that any country, Pakistan, should give away their sovereignty, number one. But what does sovereignty mean? It means choice, doesn't it really? It means that I can choose A or B or C. Now, and then this morning we talked about Maslow's needs, the pyramid, right? So when people don't have food or they don't have medicine, basic medicine, well, if we can do digital transformation, that's great. If we can do leapfrogging to the future, fantastic, I'm all for it. But I also think people should eat. I also think they should get medicine. It's kind of basic for me. So choice is the key. Government is here to give prosperity to its people. That's the role of government. Defend the borders, give prosperity to the people. That's actually the only role of government, and that has infrastructure connotations, that has public service, that has freedom, rule of law. It has many, many things embedded in it, right? And one of the things I like about public-private partnerships is that it actually makes government and private sector cooperate in delivering that. It makes them cooperate, as opposed to, looking at each other and not. So to get back to the issue of choice, I think the CPEC and I think China Road and Belt gives a lot of choice to the countries of Central Asia to the countries like Pakistan who have entered into specific arrangements. Who else today has the capital to bring 50 billion, 100 billion? Is it Europe? No. I mean, I live in Europe. We don't have that capability. Can we bring technology? Can we bring certain projects? Can we do many, many things with CPAC, the Europeans, the Americans? Yes. But bringing in that neighborhood, neighboring country, with also all of the direct links between the countries. No, I think CPAC is a tremendous. Now, using the PPP model, using other models to balance and contain, using what I said earlier about feasibility studies, making sure the feasibility, the technical, the economic feasibility, that there's a sustainable cash flow to pay off that debt balance is I think, very, very good. That's what we should be focused on, not turning our backs to choice. Choice is good. Having that option is good for Pakistan. It would be crazy not to do it, but it has to be properly done. And the tools are there. The tools are there, I think.
Thanks for your reassuring comment. We'll take some questions from the audience, just a couple of them because of the paucity of time. Please, if any one of you wants to ask any questions, please.
I think it's the...
Thank you. My name is Moeen Bartley, and I'm a consultant with the Board of Investment. So public-private partnership started some time ago, maybe a couple of decades ago. And times have changed. So the question is, thinking of today's world and thinking of the overall plan, the overall strategy, what place does it hold in today's world? Is it really as relevant? Do you need the public part of it? How much do you need the public part of it? Because as it all started out, because the traditional model was the public sector builds infrastructure, and then the private sector got into it. So what's the future of public-private partnership? Should the public part become smaller? How should it be structured differently? Okay. What's the future of it?
Thank you. Matt, would you like to?
Thank you very much. Very good question. I would go back to the point that PPPs, PFIs cannot answer the question what to do. That you need to decide from a policy level. Right? Where I think PPP and PFI model is still very relevant is where you have singular separable projects, right? Where you have a vision and strategy for the entire sector, and then you can isolate specific assets, right, that you conclude are necessary, then it's still a very effective tool for efficient delivery and financing, right? But you have to think about this as a tool for discrete projects, not as a system solution for infrastructure needs of the entire sector, right? And we've saw a lot of that kind of change in developed markets in the UK, but many other developed countries, right, is that we moved from kind of mass adoption of PPPs as an answer to anything we want to construct, to being a selective tool for particular projects as part of the overall system. And I think that selection is important. But I think the private sector has still a very big role to play in those projects in terms of efficient delivery and financing.
Yeah, I fully agree. But actually, I think, interestingly enough, a lot of the systems are actually being designed and implemented. It's okay, we'll just share. Because I think that they need it. Are actually being done by the public sector. You see, that's the interesting thing. It's not necessarily the private sector that's coming in the more developed markets. This idea that the government has to totally withdraw, and then this idea that that this asset, this rail system, this is going to be done by PFI, PPP model. Actually, if you look at France, the UK, Germany, the more developed markets, you see some countries actually coming to where major assets and major systems are actually being deployed by the governments again. So, I think the issue is more the issue about the plan. The plan, the strategy, getting it right, having proper feasibility, proper technical, and then whether the private sector delivers partially, whether it's a PPP, whether some of it's public, but with private contractors, private financing, it's a mix. I don't think there's one size fits all answer. Yeah.
I guess we've ran out of time, so I would like to thank the panelists for an extremely invigorating discussion. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We ask you to please remain on stage as I will invite to the stage Mr. Muhammad Yawed Akhai, the chairman of Martin Dow, to please come up on stage to hand out a token of appreciation to our moderator and our speakers. Token of appreciation is going to be handed out to our moderator, Mr. Adnan Rizvi, the partner of KPMG Pakistan, and also to our dear speakers as well. Yes, and next, it's going to be handed out to Mr. David Shed, the partner of DENTONS of the United Kingdom and the board member of Indego Africa and Positive Planet UK. And next is to Dr. Matt Firla-Cuchra, the partner of KPMG UK. Thank you, gentlemen. And now we're going to have a group photo session as well. Just now, the topic was the infrastructure development in Pakistan through the PPP mode. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please give them a big round of applause. Despite the shorter time discussion, it was very interactive. To our dear moderator, we thank you so much for moderating the discussion.